chosen soul. A poem was written about you before you knew, before you recognized, and before you understood what you were, who you'd become, and where you'd go. Someone saw, knew, and understood your story, your journey, and your destiny before it fully unfolded, completely manifested, and totally revealed itself. And they wrote a poem about you, capturing your essence, describing your path, and prophesying your future in words, verses, and stanzas that spoke about someone like you, someone walking your path, living your journey, and becoming what you're becoming. The poem was written long ago by poets, prophets, and seers who saw what was coming, who knew what was emerging, and who understood what was being born through souls like yours. The poem spoke of one who would walk alone through the wilderness, through darkness, and through unknown territory where others couldn't, wouldn't, and feared to follow. It described the isolation of transformation, the solitude of metamorphosis, and the loneliness of becoming something no one around you could understand, recognize, or support because they hadn't walked this path, experienced this transformation, or undergone this metamorphosis. The poem knew you'd be alone, not because you chose isolation, but because your path required solitude for a transformation that couldn't happen in a crowd, in comfort, or in the company of those who weren't called to the same journey. The poem described your strength, not the strength you performed, the power you projected, or the courage you pretended, but the real strength hidden beneath the surface. It is the actual power concealed in breaking, the genuine courage disguised as weakness. It spoke of how you'd endure what would break others, survive what would destroy normal people, and transform through what would defeat ordinary souls. The poem understood that your strength wasn't in never falling, but in always rising, wasn't in never breaking, but in how you mended, wasn't in never losing, but in how you transformed loss into gain, defeat into victory, and breakdown into breakthrough. The poem spoke of your wounds, the deep, hidden ones you never showed anyone. It knew about the childhood trauma, the teenage heartbreak, and the adult betrayal that shaped you, formed you, and made you who you are. The poem didn't glorify your wounds, romanticize your pain, or minimize your trauma. Instead, it recognized how wounds would become wisdom, how pain would transform into power, and how trauma would turn into a testimony that heals others, helps the masses, and transforms generations through your willingness to transform your own suffering into service. The poem described your rebellion against systems, structures, and expectations that tried to contain you, control you, and conform you. It spoke of how you'd question everything, challenge tradition, and resist programming that didn't serve your soul, your truth, or your calling. The poem celebrated your rebellion not as defiance, but as discernment, not as disobedience, but as divine alignment, not as resistance, but as recognition of your true nature that couldn't be squeezed into boxes that weren't designed for souls like yours. The poem knew about your gifts, the ones you denied, the talents you minimized, and the abilities you dismissed as nothing special, as just natural, or as everyone's normal. It saw what you couldn't see about your unique capacity, your distinctive ability, and your special gift to see, know, and understand what others miss, ignore, or deny. The poem prophesied how these gifts would eventually be recognized, valued, and utilized, not by you hiding them to fit in, but by you honoring them to serve. not by you minimizing them to be acceptable, but by you maximizing them to be useful. The poem spoke of your calling, the one you felt but doubted, sensed but questioned, knew but feared. It described how this calling would haunt you, pursue you, and give you no peace until you finally accepted it, embraced it, and embodied it. The poem understood your resistance, hesitation, and fear of a calling that seemed too big, too impossible, and too much for someone like you. But it also knew you'd eventually surrender, not because you felt adequate, but because you couldn't resist it anymore. The poem described your transformation not as a single event, but as a process, a journey, and an evolution of dying to your old self, shedding a false identity, and releasing everything that wasn't actually you. It spoke of the pain of transformation, the agony of metamorphosis, and the suffering of rebirth into who you actually are. The poem didn't promise an easy transformation, painless change, or comfortable growth. Instead, it promised a worthwhile transformation, necessary change, and essential growth that would reveal the real you buried beneath years, decades, and a lifetime of conditioning. The poem knew about your doubts, the constant questioning, the persistent uncertainty, and the ongoing self-doubt about whether you're good enough, ready enough, or worthy enough for what you're called to, meant for, and destined to accomplish. The poem addressed your doubts not by dismissing them, but by acknowledging them as a normal, human, and expected part of the journey for anyone called to something greater than they currently are. The poem spoke of your voice that you learned to silence, suppress, and minimize to please others, avoid conflict, and maintain peace at the cost of your own truth, expression, and authenticity. It prophesied how you'd eventually find your voice, reclaim your expression, and restore your authenticity. And when you did, your voice would shake systems, challenge structures, and speak truths that others couldn't, wouldn't, or dared not speak. The poem knew your voice was coming, emerging, and being prepared for the moment when the world would need to hear what only you could say. The poem described your love, not romantic love, but the deep, profound, transformative love for humanity, truth, and justice that would drive you, sustain you, and fuel you through everything, including opposition, persecution, and rejection. The poem understood your love wasn't sentimental, weak, or naive, but a powerful, revolutionary, and transformative force that would heal wounds, bridge divides, and transform hatred into hope, conflict into connection, and division into unity through your willingness to love. Even when love cost you everything, the poem knew about your darkness, the shadow you tried to hide, the parts you wanted no one to see. It didn't condemn your darkness, judge your shadow, or shame your hidden parts, but recognized them as necessary, valuable, and part of your wholeness. The poem prophesied how you'd eventually integrate your shadow, embrace your darkness, and accept your hidden parts. In doing so, you would become whole, powerful, and authentic in ways those who deny their shadow never can, never will, and never achieve. The poem spoke of your creativity that couldn't be contained in traditional forms, structures, or expressions. It described how you'd create new ways, methods, and approaches to old problems, challenges, and limitations. The poem celebrated your creativity as a rebellion against the status quo, resistance to mediocrity, and a refusal to accept that that's just how it's always been done. Your creativity would disrupt, innovate, and transform everything in your domain, your sphere, and your territory. The poem described your patience. You'd need to develop, cultivate, and embody patience because timing would test you, delays would frustrate you, and waiting would challenge you like nothing else could. The poem knew your journey wouldn't happen on your timeline, your schedule, or your plan, but on a divine timeline, a cosmic schedule, and a universal plan that required patience, demanded trust, and necessitated surrender to timing you couldn't control, force, or manipulate into happening sooner than the appointed time. The poem spoke of your influence that would eventually extend far beyond what you could imagine, conceive, or believe possible. It described how your story would inspire millions, how your journey would encourage generations, and how your transformation would catalyze movements of awakening, change, and evolution in consciousness. The poem saw what you couldn't see about the ripple effect of your life, your choices, and your transformation that would touch countless lives. It would change innumerable hearts and transform immeasurable souls through your willingness to be transformed first. The poem knew about your loneliness, the deep, existential loneliness of being different, seeing differently, and understanding what others don't, can't, and won't comprehend. It acknowledged the isolation of a consciousness that's evolved beyond its environment, peer group, and current circumstances. The poem promised you'd eventually find your people, your tribe, and your family of choice who understand, recognize, and celebrate what makes you different, unique, and extraordinary. But it also honored the loneliness you'd endure before finding them. The poem described your authenticity that would eventually emerge from beneath layers of performance, pretense, and people-pleasing that you'd learn to employ to survive, succeed, and be accepted in a world that rewarded conformity, punished authenticity, and demanded sameness. The poem prophesied how you'd eventually choose authenticity over acceptance, truth over approval, and being real over being liked. And how this choice would liberate you, empower you, and align you with your true path, true purpose, and true calling. The poem spoke of your courage, not the loud, obvious, dramatic courage of heroes and stories, but the quiet, daily, persistent courage of continuing when exhausted, persisting when discouraged, and moving forward when terrified. It celebrated your courage to be vulnerable, honest, and real in a world that values armor over authenticity, performance over presence, and image over essence. It is your courage to remove the mask, drop the pretense, and be genuinely, completely, and totally yourself, despite the cost, risk, and uncertainty of how others would respond. The poem described your resilience, how you'd bend but not break, fall but not stay down, lose but not give up. It spoke of the elasticity of your spirit. The durability of your soul and the tenacity of your being would carry you through fire, flood, and wilderness experiences that would test every limit, challenge every boundary, and push every capacity to the absolute edge. The poem knew you had what it takes to survive, endure, and overcome what breaks most people, defeats normal souls, and destroys ordinary beings. The poem knew about your questions, the endless why, the persistent how, and the constant what if that drove you, consumed you, and wouldn't let you rest in comfortable answers, simple explanations, or easy beliefs. It described your mind as restless, seeking, and questioning everything, accepting nothing at face value. The poem celebrated your questions as intelligence, not confusion, as wisdom, not ignorance, as consciousness, not doubt. Your questioning would lead you to truths others miss, to understanding others don't reach, and to knowing others can't access. The poem spoke of your fire. It knew the burning passion, the consuming purpose, and the relentless drive that would propel you forward even when everyone said stop, everything said impossible, and circumstances said give up. It described your fire as both a gift and a curse, a power and a pain, a blessing and a burden. Because a fire that burns this bright, this hot, and this intense consumes everything in its path, including a comfortable life, safe choices, and a normal existence you never wanted anyway. The poem described your teaching, not formal teaching, but the organic, natural, authentic teaching that happens through living, being, and demonstrating what's possible, real, and what works. It prophesied how people would learn from watching you, observing your journey, and witnessing your transformation, not because you proclaimed yourself a teacher, but because your life became the lesson, your journey became the teaching, and your transformation became the testimony. It teaches more powerfully than any formal instruction ever could, would, or has. The poem knew about your sensitivity that you called a weakness, tried to harden, and wished wasn't so intense, deep, or overwhelming. It reframed your sensitivity as a superpower, not a weakness, as a gift, not a curse, as a capacity, not a liability for feeling what others miss, sensing what others ignore, and perceiving what others deny about energy, truth, and reality beneath the surface, behind the facade, and under the pretense. The poem celebrated your sensitivity as exactly what makes you capable of doing what you're meant to do. The poem spoke of your timing, how nothing would happen when you wanted, expected, or demanded it to, but how everything would happen precisely when it needed to, was meant to, and was designed to by an intelligence greater than your understanding, a wisdom beyond your comprehension, and a plan exceeding your imagination. The poem described your frustration with divine timing, your impatience with the cosmic schedule, and your resistance to the universal plan. But it also promised you'd eventually see, understand, and recognize the perfect timing of everything that happened when it happened. The poem described your becoming not as an arrival at a destination, but as a continuous journey, an ongoing process, and a perpetual evolution into more of who you actually are. It spoke of how you'd never stop growing, changing, and becoming a more authentic, aligned, and actualized version of yourself. The poem understood your journey doesn't end with a single achievement, one accomplishment, or a particular milestone, but continues, unfolds, and expands throughout your entire life, your complete journey, and your total existence. The poem knew about your hunger for truth, meaning, and purpose that couldn't be satisfied by success, achievement, or the acquisition of things. Status and recognition satisfied everyone else but left you empty, unfulfilled, and unsatisfied. It described your hunger as sacred, a calling, and evidence of your divine nature, spiritual essence, and cosmic connection that demands more than the material world can provide, more than physical existence can deliver, and more than temporal reality can satisfy, your hunger for eternal, infinite, and transcendent truth. Chosen Soul, a poem was written about you long before you knew who you were, what you'd become, or where you'd go. The poem saw you, knew you, and understood you in ways you couldn't yet see, know, or understand yourself. The poem was written by poets who walked before you, by prophets who saw what was coming, and by seers who recognized the pattern, archetype, and journey of chosen souls across the ages. The poem is still being written, lived, and fulfilled through your life, choices, and transformation. You are the poem embodied, the verses lived, the prophecy manifested. It is not someone else's story, journey, or destiny. It is yours, written in the stars before time began, spoken by prophets before you were born, and lived by you in this moment. The poem was written about you, and you're living it, breathing it, and becoming it every day, with every choice and every step forward into your destiny, calling, and purpose that was written about long ago and is being fulfilled right now through you. Keep living the poem, being the verse, and embodying the prophecy that was written about you before you knew, recognized, or understood that your life is the poem, your journey is the art, and your transformation is the masterpiece being created, revealed, and fulfilled through you now. The poem spoke of your seasons, the spring of new beginnings, the summer of growth and expansion, the autumn of harvest and release, and the winter of death and dormancy. It described how you'd cycle through all seasons multiple times throughout your journey. Each season would teach different lessons, develop different capacities, and reveal different aspects of who you are. The poem warned you not to resist winter, rush spring, fear autumn, or exhaust summer, but to honor each season for what it brings, what it teaches, and what it prepares in you. The poem described your relationships, how some would come to teach you what you needed to learn, how others would arrive to reflect what you needed to see, and how certain connections would catalyze what you needed to release. It spoke of soul contracts, divine appointments, and cosmic arrangements that brought the right people at the right time for the right reason, even when the reason wasn't immediately clear, obviously beneficial, or apparently positive. The poem knew every relationship served your evolution, growth, and becoming, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones. The poem knew about your breaking points, the moments when you couldn't continue or endure. You couldn't survive one more day, hour, or moment of what you were going through. It described these breaking points not as failures, endings, or defeats, but as breakthrough moments, beginnings, and transformations where your old self, ways, and patterns shattered so a new self, new ways, and new patterns could emerge. The poem understood you had to break through, shatter to transform, and die to resurrect. The poem spoke of your service, not the service you performed to be seen, recognized, or validated, but the quiet, hidden, unnoticed service you gave without recognition, reward, or acknowledgement from anyone except the divine, who saw, knew, and valued every act of service, gesture of kindness, and moment of giving when no one was watching, would know, or could see. The poem celebrated your service as sacred, as worship, and as an offering to the divine, not a performance for humans. The poem described your wisdom, not the wisdom from books or formal education. It was the wisdom from living, suffering, and transforming through fire, flood, and wilderness. This gave you an understanding that can't be taught, knowledge that can't be studied, and insight that can't be learned, only earned through experience, processing, and integrating everything you've been through. The poem recognized your wisdom as a credential more valuable than any degree, title, or certification could ever be. The poem knew about your ancestors, the ones who walked before you, prayed for you, and prepared the way for you through their sacrifices, suffering, and survival against odds that should have destroyed them but didn't. Because you were coming, and because your calling required their survival, preservation, and perseverance. The poem honored your ancestors as the foundation of your journey, the roots of your tree, and the source of your strength that flows through generations, bloodlines, and legacy into you. The poem spoke of your intuition. You learned to doubt, override, and dismiss it in favor of logic, reason, and evidence that contradicted what you knew deep down all along. It described how you'd eventually learn to trust your knowing, honor your sensing, and follow your intuition even when it made no sense, others disagreed, or evidence suggested otherwise. The poem prophesied your intuition would lead you to a truth, safety, and destiny that logic alone could never, would never, and did never find. The poem described your boundaries that you'd need to establish, maintain, and defend against those who wanted access to you, your energy, your time, and your gifts without respect, reciprocity, or regard for your well-being. The poem celebrated your boundaries not as selfishness, but as self-care, not as rejection, but as protection, not as meanness, but as wisdom that preserves your capacity to serve those you're actually meant to serve in the ways you're actually called to serve. The poem knew about your legacy that you'd leave, not through what you accumulated, achieved, or acquired, but through who you became, how you loved, and what you transformed in yourself that would ripple out to others, to generations, and to eternity. The poem described your legacy as living, breathing, and continuing long after you're gone through the lives you touched, the hearts you changed, and the souls you transformed simply by being who you actually are. The poem spoke of your freedom that you'd eventually find, not freedom from responsibility, but freedom in responsibility, not freedom from commitment, but freedom through commitment, not freedom from purpose, but freedom in a purpose that aligns with who you actually are. The poem described true freedom not as an absence of constraint, but as the presence of alignment with truth, calling, and destiny that liberates even within a structure, even with responsibility, and even through a commitment that's right and true. The poem described your joy, not the happiness dependent on circumstances, situations, or conditions being just right, but the deep, abiding, unshakable joy that comes from alignment, authenticity, and being who you actually are, doing what you're actually called to do, and living how you're actually meant to live. The poem knew this joy would sustain you through trials, carry you through difficulties, and maintain you through challenges that would destroy a happiness based on circumstances alone. The poem knew about your enemies, not the ones who openly opposed you, but the ones who smiled while undermining, praised while plotting, and befriended while betraying. It warned you about wolves in sheep's clothing, enemies disguised as friends, and opposition masquerading as support. The poem promised you'd develop discernment to recognize true from false, authentic from counterfeit, and friend from foe before they could damage what you're building, creating, and manifesting. Chosen soul. The poem was written about you. Every verse, line, and word describes your journey, transformation, and becoming. You're not reading someone else's story. You're living your own poem. You're not watching someone else's journey. You're walking your own path. You're not observing someone else's transformation. You're undergoing your own metamorphosis. The poem is yours. The story is yours. The journey is yours. Written long ago by those who saw what was coming, knew what was emerging, and understood what was being born through souls like yours. The poem continues. The story unfolds. And the prophecy manifests through you today, tomorrow, and always. Keep living the poem. Keep being the art. Keep embodying the masterpiece that was written about you, for you, and through you before time, during time, and beyond time. Your life is the poem, and it's beautiful.